It means a great deal to me to have an opportunity to speak about Joyce Wieland, and especially about this remarkable film, in my view, her greatest. Her sense of patriotism, marked with an ironic, militant sentimentality, is a guiding light for many of us who believe in a Canadian art and a Canadian cinema that reflects the lived experience of this country and that has a dignified sense of its own borders. How rare that is now, how rare it was then. Through the final years of the 1960s, having lived in New York for a number of years, Joyce Wieland longed to make a permanent return to Canada. Her activities in painting, quilting, and sculpture had gained the attention of the Canadian art establishment, but that work remained obscure in New York. Whatever attention she gained stateside, she gained through her films. Wieland's work would become more explicitly Canadian in content through the course of the centennial, as her paintings and quilts began to consistently allude to Canada, for example, with the collage sculptures Puerco de Navidad and Confedspread, both from 1967. In the vastness of the Canadian terrain, Wieland recognized a true north strong and free, strong in its discipline, its espousing of bilingualism, in its codes and customs gained from a collision of British and French colonial powers, its curious position of absorbing and in threat of being absorbed by American culture, free as a land nearing the centenary of its independence, where the government advanced a Canada in which intellect ruled, where reasoned calculation could better ensure the most sensible direction for government and a utopian protection of individual freedoms. It was free also in the possibilities posed by the sweeping canvas of the prairies and of regions left uncharted or unpaved, free as a site where the New World's natural beauty was unobstructed and, by that lack of so-called civilizing, preserved. In January 1968, Joyce Wieland traveled to the Vancouver Art Gallery, which was staging a survey of her work. She took the transcontinental train from Toronto to Vancouver, known as the Canadian. It still runs today, which cuts through a vast and sparely populated stretch of the prairies. The journey took 1 week and led past the Lake of the Woods, through the prairies to British Columbia. She brought her Bolex camera and a tape recorder and began to film out of the windows of the train. The following June, she would film the eastern part of Canada by car, passing along the Trans-Canada Highway from Toronto to Nova Scotia. And in the interim, in April of that year of 1968, she had filmed Trudeau at the Ottawa Civic Centre on the occasion of the Liberal Leadership Convention when he became the leader of the Canadian Liberal Party. Sitting in the press section below Trudeau, she had a medium-shot view of him taking his seat and staring out at the press. She would later rephotograph this footage, you'll see it tonight, slowing it down and cropping in to form a more intimate portrait in which Trudeau's expressions become obscure, caught between menace and benevolence. She put all of this footage away along with her travel footage, unsure of what to do with it. Later, she would decide to make a sandwich, using the train and car trips as bread, with Pierre Elliott Trudeau in the center, from which vantage point he could provide the reasoned counterpoint to Wieland's passion. Her friend and fellow filmmaker Hollis Frampton would provide algorithmic rearrangements of the title phrase, printed over her images at a steady pace. In putting reason over passion together, Wieland would reverse the trajectory of her journey, beginning with the car trip, ending with the train trip, bridged in the middle by the portrait of Trudeau, which she has elasticized and recomposed, and set to what becomes a comic language lesson of a child named Pierre introducing himself. Her earlier films had gradually developed an individual sense of temporal and spatial relations, maturing rapidly through 1967. They would serve as a prelude to the more substantial project of Reason Over Passion. Wieland had described the film by its relation to Trudeau's own theme, Reason Over Passion. That's the theme of all of my writings. She said, "I decided to unite the leader of the land and cement it with his words, not so much cement as spread them across a continent. Reason over passion, overwhelmed, metamorphosed into passion through use." As she made the film, Wieland imagined herself as Leni Riefenstahl. She became a propagandist whose work embodied an earnest declaration, but that by virtue of its intimate, passionate, irrational aesthetic, eagerly and gladly undermined that message. The film was an act of subterfuge, a compromise of the rational by an omnipresence of passionate intensity, and by anagrams and chronological ruptures. Wieland would characterize the resulting work as, quote, a dialogue between Trudeau and myself, but speaking to and working for Canada, a definition that extends to the rest of this suite of works, quilts and etchings that also bear the title Reason Over Passion. But the film in particular takes on a staggering scale relative to her earlier work in cinema, as an epic illustration of the relation of the land to the psychology and intent of its government and its people, an illustration of a Canada strong and free, and yet menaced by Trudeau's proud imbalance, in which reason bests passion for the good of the country, menaced also by the country's own ephemeral, increasingly abstracted sense of itself. With Reason Over Passion, Wieland cuts a path through the country by which it might reveal its own uncertain, indirect self-portrait. Reason Over Passion is the summit of Wieland's nationalism, a grand gesture resulting from years abroad and a longing for home. It marks home as her primary concern as the dwindling apocalyptic days of the 1960s, and with them, fear of a weakening Canadian sovereignty, had left her wondering if there would even be a country to which to return home. She revealed that home in its vastness, a premature mourning of the land. Reason Over Passion is lodged on behalf of a nation that, despite all competing definitions, was most accurately defined by its precarious position, on the verge of extinction or absorption into something else, back into the French and English colonial interests from which it had formed, or into the selfish individualism and ecological despair of America. The formal challenges of the film, the indirect relationships and structures that Wieland assembles from symbols and texts and stuttering vistas, reflect challenges of comprehension within the culture itself, where divides of language become excuses for the willful deafness, blindness, and sensual disavowal that compromise a menacing indifference. Joyce Wieland discovers that reason cannot be metamorphosed into passion through use, but that passion rather seeps out of Canada's green pastures and paved roads, out of the frosted air, and into whatever eternal might remain glorious and free. Thank you very much and enjoy the film. Thanks.